Motherlode Catering.
It worked out fine. My son.
Do we have any announcements? I think we have one, if the lady is still aware.
Karen did a great job.
I have one that's kind of interesting. Most of us are aware of AB 32 and the disaster it's about to do to our economy. AB 32. I don't think anyone would object to the Global Warming Solutions Act if it was needed for global warming, or if global warming were a problem. What is so sad is that the science that it's based on, which is called the carbon global warming theory, is not based on science. It's based on political process. And to base legislation that'll have such a devastating effect on our California economy on something that's not grounded on science is, well, actually it's criminal. But there's good news. There's AB 118 by Logue, which is to repeal the hurtful AB 32. It's now in committee. The purple sheet, there's 5 of them over there. I don't want to waste paper. Has the names, phone numbers, and email addresses of each of the assembly members that are on that committee. If anyone is so inspired and wanted to just sit down for a half hour, an hour, and go over and let each of those people know you want that out of committee and you want it passed, that would do so much good. And if every taxpayer association like ours would do the same thing, guess what? The battle's won. Anyway, the purple sheet. And I think there is an announcement out there from a beautiful young lady who has yet to come forward. So let's see if I can do her announcement for her. I'm not as familiar with her topic as she is. The Tea Party is set to converge on the state capitol. And this is on August 28th. And there's going to be buses. The last time there were thousands of people. It's expected there might be more than 10,000 this time. John Coppell in the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association is also involved with this. We are going to, our taxpayers group won't be able to go to that one, but we're going to go to the meeting in Jackson on the 22nd with Bill Lundgren to talk a little bit about what we think about Obamacare and about tax and, I was going to say tax and spend, but it's like cap and tax. And anyway, if any of you would like to join us on the trip to Jackson on the 22nd, we want to be there at 10:30. Now, it's time for our main speaker, which is John Coppell. I think we're going to have him every year if he would come. He was great last year. This is our second annual. We're better this year than we were last year. Next year we'll be better yet. Next year we won't be here because we have yellow jackets and we weren't able to get them all. We're going to be at Steve Fairchild's home in Angels Camp in a large backyard with a beautiful lawn. It's going to be a much better environment.
No zip line. You don't have to zip line in your backyard.
John Coppell is president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, HJTA. HJTA, with offices in Los Angeles and Sacramento, it's the largest taxpayers association in California with a membership of over 200,000. Founded by the late Howard Jarvis, the author of Proposition 13, HGATA's name is synonymous with tax relief and the uncompromising defense of the California homeowner. He won't quit. From 1991 to 1998, Coupel served as Director of Legal Affairs for HJTA, overseeing the organization's litigation and lobbying efforts. He looks so nice. He looks so innocent. It's hard to believe he's an attorney. He is recognized expert in California fiscal affairs and has argued numerous tax cases before the courts. Coupel has also successfully defended Proposition 140, the state's term limit initiative, before the California Supreme Court. In 1995, he won a major ruling before the Supreme Court when it held the validity of Proposition 62, an HJTA-sponsored initiative guaranteeing the right to vote on local taxes. He is also the principal drafter of Prop 218, the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, a measure passed by the voters in November 1996. That might have been before many of your time, but it's really still valid. He has served as chairman of several initiative campaigns representing the interests of taxpayers, including the campaign against Prop 88, a statewide parcel tax initiative, and the successful defeat of Prop 1A, defeated by the voters on May 19th this year. Wow, 2/3 to 1. In 2003, he served as a member of Governor Schwarzenegger's transition team. Coupel is also chairman of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Foundation, which is different, which provides funding for taxpayer rights litigation and educational studies. Coupel is a graduate of the Marshall Wine School of Law at the College of William and Mary, where he received his J.D. degree in 1982. After law school, he was an attorney with the Pacific Legal Foundation, for 9 years, specializing in tax issues and political law. He resides in Sacramento with his wife, Catherine, daughter, Elena, and son, Adam. John, we're so proud to have you here. Why don't you come forward and give us a few words?
So he says the microphone is tricky. We'll see if we can make this work here. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here again. I thought after last year you probably would not want to hear from me again, but here we are. I want to thank Al and your organization and everybody who was involved in the wonderful victory we had this year in the defeat of Proposition 1A. It was really interesting about that campaign is that it received quite a bit of Republican support, the Democrats supported it, the governor supported it, virtually the entire business community in Sacramento supported it. It reminded me a lot about Prop 13, where every single organization, every single editorial board, every major corporation opposed Prop 13. The only people who supported it were the people. And Prop 1A that campaign reminded me a lot of the original 1978 campaign with Proposition 13, because it was a reflection of the huge disconnect between the political elite and ordinary Californians. And again, you may think you're just in Calaveras County, but I'll tell you, taxpayers everywhere rose up and told Sacramento, no, we're mad as hell, we're not going to take it anymore, we're not going to spend any more money, and we're sure as heck not going to approve another $16 billion in taxation. Most of you who are homeowners know about Proposition 13. Believe me, it saved you a lot of money. Prop 13 has saved California property owners $528 billion since 1978. That's $500 billion. And that's a conservative estimate. And if you don't believe that Prop 13 has saved you money, estimate what the value of your property is right now, fair market value, and apply a tax rate of about 2.5% to that. That is what you'd be paying right now instead of the 1% that Prop 13 dictates. So Prop 13 continues to save Californians lots of money. We're screwed up in our income tax, we're screwed up in our sales tax, but at least with property tax, we are protected thanks to the good works of Howard Jarvis and Paul Gamm. The challenges that face the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and by extension you, as members of a local taxpayer group, are many. In this fiscal climate, this economic crisis, we have a lot of challenges. And some of them are the same challenges that we faced for a long time. The first one, of course, the most principal one, is are the direct attacks on Proposition 13. We have faced a number of direct attacks on Prop 13, and we have rejected them all except one. Back in 2000, our opponents were successful in lowering the two-thirds vote for local school bonds from two-thirds down to 55%. That was Proposition 39. That was our only significant loss. They guaranteed us, and they sold it not as a tax increase, they sold it as more accountability, and unfortunately the voters bought it. And they did claim, of course, that education would be vastly improved, and I would leave it to your own judgment as to whether or not we have improved education in California since the year 2000. I would respectfully suggest just the opposite. We've had a lot of victories. We fought Prop 56 in November of '04. That would have lowered the vote threshold for both the budget passage and statewide tax increases to 55%. We crushed that by a 66% margin. And when people complain about the two-thirds vote, they say, they'll come to you and say, yeah, look, you're a fiscal conservative. How can you possibly justify the two-thirds vote? The two-thirds vote is anti-democratic. One person canceling out the votes of two other people. And you look at them and you say, look, one definition of democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. We have two-thirds vote protection. The United States Constitution has mentions a two-thirds vote in 12 different places. And before convicting a person of a felony, it requires a unanimous vote of 12 individuals. So supermajorities are there for a reason. They're there to make sure there's a higher degree of consensus. And when it comes to the government action of taking money out of your wallet against your will, a supermajority is not too much to ask. We also fought Prop 88 back in November of '06. That was a statewide parcel tax. Stupid. You never want to give the state any ability at all to levy a property tax. Once they get their foot in that door, then forget it. Because right now, property taxes are levied and collected and spent by local governments. You don't want to give the state that opportunity. Another challenge we have is, in addition to the direct attacks on Proposition 13, are the indirect attacks. And the biggest indirect attack on Prop 13 is the obfuscation of fees versus taxes. Well, this is a tax, this is a fee. And fees, taxes require a two-thirds vote of each house of the legislature, but fees do not. So you can imagine what happens, and that is that the state starts calling things that used to be called taxes, now calls them fees, and you see that a little bit at the local level as well. This is a problem, and one of the reforms that we're looking at going forward for new initiatives is to take care of this problem. And I'll just give you it's been called the Sinclair paint problem. The reason it's called the Sinclair paint problem is that that's the name of the case where the California Supreme Court really blurred the lines between fees and taxes. The law was pretty clear before then. They kind of screwed it up, and we have to go back and to deal with it. So if you hear that phrase, know that that's what they're talking about, and it is a very, very important issue that we have to confront. Skipping back just briefly on this, because this is a direct attack on Prop 13, is the issue of, it's called a split roll. Split roll is not a pastry. Split roll is, as your county assessor will tell you, is dividing the property tax roll into classifications based on use. In California, when people talk about a split roll, they're basically talking splitting the roll between commercial property and residential. Note, however, that some states have 24 classifications. Michigan, I think, has 24 classifications. They have a different tax rate for parking garages. They have a different tax rate for golf courses. You don't want to go down that road because it's it gets very convoluted. We have, since the mid-1800s in California, had a uniform roll. It's in the best interests of homeowners and businesses, and we support the policy of keeping a uniform roll in the state of California, if for no other reason, to make sure your assessor doesn't have more work in front of her. So, and she's applauding. So, And the other of the many challenges we face, and of course we can't talk about California public finance without talking about our budget and debt situation. California is a strange state. I mean, we're looked at, you go back to D.C., you go back to the East Coast, and they look at you, you're from California. Well, what's it really like out there? I mean, they look at you like you're from Venus or something, and which a lot of our legislators are. That's a little known fact. The spaceship comes every now and then to deliver the new class of legislators. It's like a bad episode of Men in Black or something. I don't know. How these guys can take a state that's generating $20 billion of surplus revenue and flip it around so badly and spend every dollar that comes in the door, and then when the economy turns around, which it always does, we didn't see this coming. It's just bad management, bad politics, bad political representation, with our elected officials not being able to adopt a budget that reflects the amount of money that comes in the door. That is a basic principle.
I like that.
You as a family, you as a small business, you can't spend money you haven't got. You might be able to ring up the visa bill a little bit, and certainly the state has done that, but that only lasts for so long. So the answer back in February, when there was a huge, projected to be 20 or 38 billion, I forget the number, budget shortfall, the governor negotiated a tax increase in February, and the idea was to put certain measures on the ballot, including Proposition 1A. Now, this latest round did not increase any additional taxes, but keep in mind, in February, because of the budget deal, we're already paying $12 billion of higher taxes than we were a year ago. So this notion that, we don't absorb tax increases is simply false, because we already got hit with the $12 billion of what I call sick taxes, S-I-C-K. The sales tax, income tax, car tax, and kid tax. Those were 4 huge tax increases. In fact, the tax increase that we got hit with in February was the largest tax increase ever enacted by any state house in the history of America. $12 billion. And what really galled me is 3 weeks ago, Darrell Steinberg, after this latest round of negotiations, steps out and the reporters are sticking their microphones in his face saying, well, how's it going? He goes, we need more taxes, we need more revenue. The problem has been the 2/3 vote. We're going to come back, we're going to fix it, we're going to repeal it, because we can't get tax increases with the 2/3 vote. And I felt like saying, where have you been? Where were you in February? The state just passed the biggest tax increase in the history of America with the 2/3 vote. So how has that been a barrier? These people will lie shamelessly about the state of affairs in the state of California. But it's something we have to deal with. We just have to call them on the carpet whenever they do it. We did lead the campaign against Prop 1A. Folks like you helped us out. Thank you very much. We oppose it for a lot of reasons. They said that Prop 1A is, I'm sorry, the sun's right in your, a lot of you people over there feel sorry for you. We oppose it for a lot of reasons, not the least of which it was sold as budget reform. Okay, we're going to have a hard cap. Was not a hard cap. Prop 1A was not a hard cap. All Prop A would have done is taken the $12 billion of tax increases and added on another $16 billion. It would have taken all those 4 sick taxes and extended them for another 1.5 or 2 years, depending on what it was. Spending limit was phony. The package had no real reforms, and that little thing of the $16 billion of additional taxes. Those are reasons that we opposed it. You did too, and we sent a huge message. Interestingly enough, let me give you some political background here. Corporate California supported Prop 1A, and they supported the whole package. Now, some of them did so willingly. Some of them were simply told by the governor and his staff, you better do this or we're going to get you some other way. And so there was a shakedown, political shakedown. But the bottom line is that the many major businesses in California supported Prop 1A. After we soundly defeated it by a 2-to-1 margin, I had lunch with the political consultant who ran the Yes campaign. It's a guy I know, guy I work with all the time. I respect him. He was just wrong on this issue. And he is a hired gun, let's face it. And he told me that, he said, you know, I've already advised my business clients that the defeat of Proposition 1A is the best thing that ever happened to them. Yeah. I am so glad that they finally get it. Because think about this, if Proposition 1A had passed with that $12 billion of the additional $16 billion of tax increases, we still would have had a budget shortfall of $10 to $20 billion. And the political left would have said, oh, Californians don't mind higher taxes, look at just what happened. But because the grassroots, ordinary Californians rose up and said, no way, no higher taxes, we've actually provided political cover to the business community, which in many instances has never been there for us. So one of the things I'm trying to do, instead of rubbing it in their faces, we've been meeting them with them and saying, do you guys finally get it? Because I honestly believe that if the corporations, big businesses and small businesses in California join together with the Tea Parties and the taxpayer groups, we can roll the opposition. I am convinced of it. I think we can take on the unions, and I think we can make their lives miserable and get the kinds of reforms we need: a hard budget cap, pension reform, fees versus taxes, all kinds of good reforms, and I think that can happen if those of us on the private side of the ledger stand firm against those on the public side of the ledger. You may have heard, just briefly, let me just touch on one thing called the Tax Commission. You may have heard of this new commission that the governor created, also called the Parsky Commission, the Tax Commission. The official name is the California Commission for the 19th Century Economy. I'm sorry, actually it was the 21st Century Economy. I call it the 19th Century Economy ever since they proposed the carbon tax, because that's right where they want to take us. They want to take us right back to the 19th century, pre-industrial America, because, you know, Lord knows we can't have carbon dioxide in the air, even though you guys are all pollutants every time you exhale. You know, and even though trees need carbon dioxide, let's forget all about that. But Al's comments were spot on. I gave a speech last night before in Lake Tahoe before a group called WISPA, the Western States Petroleum Association. These guys are being put through hell through AB 32 and the carbon and this monster known as the California Air Resources Board. You want to talk about an agency run amok. CARB is just, it's out of control. I actually feel sorry for these guys because they're having to comply with regulations that simply cannot be complied with. Their life is hell. But my hope, and one point, I'm not an expert on global warming. As Al mentioned, I think the science is at best shaky. And there is a sense that the wheels are coming off the bus on the theory of anthropogenic global warming, meaning man-made global warming. There probably is global warming over the long term, but probably more associated with sunspots than you driving your SUV. And I noticed, by the way, that Mars is the polar ice cap on Mars is also melting, and I'm sure it's because of all the SUVs driving on the surface of Mars, not because of sunspots. But anyway, we do have challenges, and together we will confront those challenges. You know, one of the biggest challenges we have, of course, is, and it continues to be, and will continue to be, thanks to Jerry Brown on laws that he passed many, many years ago when he was governor, having to do with collective bargaining for public employees, and that is the political strength of public employee unions. They are so difficult to deal with. They are so powerful, and taking them on is very difficult. But we have seen some polling on the public perception of public employees, and the sympathy is, they're losing it fast. One of the reasons they're losing sympathy very rapidly is a group that I'm associated with called the California Foundation for Fiscal Responsibility. There's a CPA by the name of Marcia Fritz in Sacramento, and she is an actuary, she's a CPA, and she has published a database of the $100,000 a year club of all the public employees who are pulling down a pension of $100,000 or more, it has people outraged. A former city manager from a small town in Southern California, the town of Vernon, pulling $450,000 a year in a pension that you and I are paying for. So, you know, we do sense a turning point, both at the national level and the state level. We were talking earlier about the pendulum swinging back. I think with Obamacare, cap and trade, and the Tea Parties, the reflection of the Tea Parties, we really sense that the pendulum is coming back. And I think there are that gives us an environment where we can actually move the needle a little bit on some stuff that we want in terms of taxpayer protection, property rights, limited government, accountability, transparency, all those kinds of things that are good, just good public policy. So with that, I'll thank you. Thank you, Al, again once more, and I'll leave it up to questions. Any questions? All the deep, dark sequencing going in Sacramento. Yeah, yes, right over here. The lottery money, you know, they said, you know, pass the lottery because it will really save education. There have been so many initiatives that they've said, well, just give us this and education will be fine. Actually, the amount of money generated by the lottery is very, very little, probably less than 1% of the state's K through 12 education budget. So, yeah, it was a drop in the bucket, and plus, in recessionary times, people aren't buying as many lottery tickets as they were in the past. But I'm glad you brought up education spending because, you know, you've heard it, we've heard it, that Prop 13 destroyed education in the state of California. The one thing you need to know about Prop 13 and education spending is this. We are now spending today on a per student inflation-adjusted basis 30% more than we were just prior to the passage of Prop 13 in the days that the education establishments say were the glory days of education, where everybody had a good education, there were extracurricular programs, and yet we're spending 30% more in inflation-adjusted dollars. How can that be? Look where the money goes. The money gets sucked up by Sacramento, and of course a lot of it goes into administration and also the pension and compensation benefits. So the money has been there. There's more of it now for education than there ever has been, and yet we still hear the complaints. Yes?
Just you said earlier that the counties, local areas set the taxes, but you didn't address the ERAP. The state has gotten into local tax money through the ERAP, which they pull out for the schools, which is 60-some%
Right.
of our money. And in our local areas, most of the small areas, do not get their equal proportional share that they sent.
Yeah, it's all going to L.A. You know, when he talks about ERAF, that's the Educational Supplemental, was it ERAF? Educational Reform something fund. I can't, it is the shifting of, and you know what's funny, because when people think that Sacramento steals your local money, actually they don't. The money does not act, and your tax collector and controller can tell you this. The money never really goes to Sacramento. What it does is it's diverted to K through 12 or K through 14, and the cities, counties, and special districts get less of the old AB8 apportionment formula. So the money never really goes to Sacramento, but Sacramento does dictate where it goes, and that has always been a problem. We are very sympathetic and would be receptive to reforms giving more local control. We've always been on the side of local governments on unfunded mandates. We agree with local governments on that, and there are a number of areas dealing with local control that we agree with cities and counties. Over here.
I have a quick question. Maybe you can explain from your point of view. It seems like there's a huge disconnect. Typically, the people don't want higher taxes. They want responsibility. It shows up in the elections. They turn them out. But they still put the same tax and spend people in Sacramento. Where's the disconnect here? Why don't they put the people in that believe the way they do?
Well, you have to understand that a lot of the elections are rigged. They've been rigged through gerrymandering and you know, and incumbent advantages. And so now we've taken care of a little bit the gerrymandering issue with the passage of Proposition 11. That's going to have some positive impact. It's not going to have a major impact because realistically that's probably only going to have an impact on 5 or 6 districts. But people need to educate themselves and understand who's running on what. I mean, some of the incumbents are able to fool people very effectively as to what their voting record is. And remember that incumbents, all they hear from in Sacramento are the tax receivers. All the program people, are lobbying, trying to get their slice of the pie. Very rarely, except for Jarvis, do you hear from the other side. It's only when we get to say no because of things like May 19th and no on 1A that incumbents go, oh, maybe the people really mean it, and say with 19th. I am getting the...
Oh, you're good.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm telling Al to sit down.
Oh. He's fine. He's got my back in case SEIU sneaks up behind me.
We got lots of time.
Plenty of time.
Okay.
Plenty of time.
Lots of questions.
One of my pet peeves is, and it's particularly in education, but it's across the board, is the issue of unfunded mandates. They drive me crazy. Can you tell us a little bit about unfunded mandates?
Yeah, there is a provision of the GAN spending limit actually said that the state cannot mandate programs without providing the subvention, but they get around it, and they get around it through the creation of a very convoluted system involving what's called the Commission on State Mandates. So they mandate programs, and then they leave it to a convoluted administrative process so the locals never really get their funding. I think there ought to be a rule that says unless the state writes the check at the time they pass the program, then locals don't have to do it. I think that would be especially in education, yeah. And I mean, one of the things that came out of this last budget fight is untying some of the restrictions to local school districts. So if Calaveras County does not have a big Hispanic gang problem, they don't have to spend allotment. If they have other issues, they probably have more transportation issues than other problems. So really, getting rid of those mandates and letting locals decide where those funds go is a good thing. And I'm going, yes, back here.
There's been a lot of talk that the state of California could possibly go into bankruptcy in order to resolve all these issues.
Right.
Could you tell us what your feelings are on that, and just in general the pros and the cons of that?
Yeah, the rule is both as a matter of federalism and bankruptcy law, states cannot declare bankruptcy. Counties can, cities can, special districts can, states cannot. States are part of our federal system. But there is technical bankruptcy, and then there's what we call de facto bankruptcy, and we're in de facto bankruptcy right now, which is measuring assets versus liabilities. And also, the real measure for a state is whether or not Wall Street will extend you credit. And Wall Street's looking at California as a basket case only because of this most recent thing did, I think, Wells Fargo, where somebody stepped up and said they'll underwrite some more revenue anticipation notes. But sooner or later, when Wall Street stops extending credit, that is, for a state, kind of a de facto bankruptcy. And we're kind of there now. I mean, look, John Chung has a stack of bills this high and a stack of cash this high. So it gets down to a point where you're not paying your bills, you're writing IOUs, you've got people banging on the door, and they really have no legal recourse to get the money because states are sovereign. But from my perspective, lack of cash is a good thing because that's the only thing that's enforcing any degree of fiscal discipline. Yes?
I have a question. Is the party's objection to the public servant's retirement exceeding $100,000 the fact that that public servant put in 30 years of life-threatening service over the 2 to 4 years of service of a legislature? Is that the objection, or is it does it encompass all of them?
I think there's probably a higher degree of sympathy for the public safety workers, fire and police, but I saw some polling that even sympathy for public safety was way down. California is the only state in the union that offers 3% at 50. No other state even comes close. So if you don't want to go, in terms of pension reform, if you don't want to go to a defined contribution and totally get rid of defined benefit, the thing you should absolutely at least do is extend the retirement age to 55 or 60. Again, making it more consistent with other states. There's just, California's out of cash, and we're out of cash because, in large part, because of the way we've operated our public pension system. And there's that cannot be disputed.
Having been the person who provided service for 30 years as a law enforcement officer, not to this county, but to another county, putting my life on the line every day for 30 years, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I just want you to know that.
Well,
I just want you to know that.
okay.
I put my life on the line every day to serve the public for 30 years.
Right. And I don't think there's anybody in this audience who wouldn't applaud your service. But the question is, look at it from a comparison perspective. Are the firefighters here worth more than the firefighters in New York City or in Washington, D.C.? I think you have to look at it from an equity perspective. And let me finish. Another part of the problem is many of the folks in public safety retire and they go to work the next day under drop programs, and there are 20 police captains in the LA Police Department who are pulling down $250,000 a year because they're both pulling their full retirement and they're pulling their paycheck.
You know what?
There's something wrong with that.
They can't do that if they work within the county that they retire
Yes,
from.
they can.
No, they
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
No, they cannot. Because
yes, they can.
after 90 days, they will lose their retirement.
Okay, he is.
$960.
Maybe the major problem,
You had a choice.
excuse me,
You didn't have to do that.
one of the major problems with the state budget has nothing to do with local jurisdictions, and it's the local jurisdictions where police and fire are generally hired. The state employee system is almost fiscally separated from local jurisdictions. And if we could get some controls over the state funded, where a lot of those pension benefits are going to end up being paid out of direct tax money, which is not the case for local employees. There's a disconnect between, and I'm not in disagreement with what you're saying, but there is a disconnect between the local employees versus the state employees and the state employee pension system. They're called the same, PERS, but when you get into the accounting of it, they're separate.
Yeah, each jurisdiction has its own account. That is correct. And let me just close the loop on this. I don't think anybody would object to public safety personnel getting a better retirement system, but the question is whether or not what we have now is sustainable. And I would strongly suggest that what we have now is not sustainable.
Let me ask you one good question. I'd like to ask you one good
Sure.
question. In a 401k, you have a 401k. What's the average? Because I don't know, I've never had a 401k. So what's the average contribution to a 401k for retirement?
It can be anything from the private sector offering matching or just setting it up and letting the employee making the full contribution. A lot of government entities do have a 401k and they match the employee's contribution.
Up to what is the maximum you've ever heard?
I don't know. I think it's probably
I
a...
paid $1,500 a month after my retirement to get what I ended up with.
That would be defined,
Yeah, defined contribution.
yeah, defined contribution, not defined benefit. That's the difference between the two. You're talking about defined benefit. Like I was a machinist for 29 years, but if I go into the same trade, then my benefit is reduced. But if I go into a totally different trade, then my contribution and my benefit remains the same. If I go into the same career that I said before, the same kind of thing, then my benefit is reduced by a certain amount.
Okay.
Because, like you're saying, if they're double dipping,
That's right.
they're reduced.
They can't double dip.
But they do. San Diego double dips. Okay, they do. The laws has been changed at the pressure of the public employee unions.
In our county, and I was in Contra Costa County, and in our county, if you work more than 90 hours a year, you lose your benefits. We can't do that.
When did you retire, by the way?
I retired in 2003.
Okay.
There's another side to that that should be brought out about 401ks. Is that
You
there's a-
look entirely too young to be retired. You should.
Nice try to confuse it. Nice try to confuse it. You're far more intelligent than that.
You should.
That was
You should be good for another 30 years.
There you go. Yeah, back.
Someone who has a 401k, first off, not everyone in the private sector is that's working, able to get a 401k. There's a lot of small businesses that don't offer 401ks. Number two, people that are in 401ks, when the stock market took a dip like it's done right now, they lost majorly in their 401k. Versus public employees are guaranteed their retirement.
But do you know that my particular retirement program invested so wisely that we made $69 billion on our investments?
If other
And we
employees,
lost
but
68
I
million
understand what you're
in the
saying,
market.
but if the private sector could put all their money together to invest and have that type of control in the market, then that's an advantage that the public unions have that the private sector doesn't. You have a huge amount of money that you can put to work that the private sector can't.
Let's close the loop on the
yeah,
pension
that's
issue
the
for just a
inequity
second.
of the whole system.
Let's wrap it up by saying this observation.
It's okay one way, but not
You're
another.
nobody who is vested, and by the way, all the public employee retirement benefits are absolutely guaranteed under the federal impairment of contracts provision of the U.S. Constitution. So you're safe, can't be touched. All we're talking about here is new hires. New hires should be put on a separate track, and we can talk about whether they should be DC plans or DB plans, but the 3% at 50 is not sustainable. Yes.
Just a quick question. That applies to those people like in Indiana, the ones who got all their retirement investment in GM stocks or GM bonds?
Yeah. Okay. Tom, did you have a comment?
I'll just give a comment on that.
When I was elected in 1984, and I assumed office in 1985, everybody had the same retirement system in Calaveras County, and I think they did in the state. And that was 2% at 60. And that's where it was in January 1st, and that was for the Deputy Sheriff's Association, that was, I believe, for the Highway Patrol, correctional officers, et cetera. And what happened is, and I agree with John here, is the public sector unions are so strong, and they gave so much money to the Democratic Party that they got an enhanced retirement. And the problem isn't just that they have an enhanced retirement, the 3% at 50. It's also that they got a lot more money than they used to get. So the 3% at 50 equaled a lot more money in retirement because the compensation for firemen, for CAL FIRE, and for the correctional officers and the Highway Patrol, I don't think the compensation went up so much for deputy sheriffs because they're paid by the counties. But they did get the 3% at 50. But if you look at the increase in compensation for CAL FIRE, for instance, for the Highway Patrol, for the correctional officers, it's so much greater over that time frame, that increase in compensation than it was given to any other governmental employee. So they not only have the enhanced retirement, they have the enhanced income, which drives the enhanced retirement even higher.
And one more element to that is, instead of the average of the last 3 years or 5 years, which other states do, we take the last year, and that's just an invitation to pension spiking because they dump in all kinds of compensation, things like vacation
When I was
allowance.
elected and assumed office in '85, it was the average of your highest 3 years. That was what your pension was returned on. Today in Calaveras County, and I think just about statewide everywhere, it's your highest 1 year. And I remember when we went to 3% at 50 for the Deputy Sheriff's Association, and I was the one that didn't want to do it and said, no, that's not right. All county employees should be treated the same. I disagree with this lady that somehow her life is on the line every day and everybody else's isn't. If you want to look at the death statistics and et cetera, the last time I looked, something that was librarians of all things. And that's because just anybody can walk in off the street to a library, and that was quite a few years ago. So I don't know what it is today. But what happened is they gave it to the Highway Patrol, and then Amador County went to 3% at 50, and the sheriff came in and said all our deputies are leaving. We're not going to have a deputy left in Calaveras County if we don't go to 3% at 50.
Yeah.
And,
Well, you know,
we went to 3% at 50, so we'd still have some deputies because we could not compete keeping them at the same retirement system as the remaining
there's another
miscellaneous
factor
county
too,
employees.
when it comes to public employees, is they get cost of living increases. Legislate, it's automatic every year, where the private sector doesn't. In down years like this, the private sector has to lower, if they're going to, these small businesses are going to stay in business, they have to lower wages. So, you know, there's a lot of inequities when it comes between the private sector and the public sector.
Except there's a lot of sacrifice to get to that point.
Oh.
And that's the part you're missing.
You have no idea
Everybody
how
works
much
hard, and
sacrifice.
everybody
I'm a
makes a lot of
private business
sacrifice.
owner. I've been in business for 30
Okay.
years, and
Right.
let me tell you how I've sacrificed.
Be a cop.
You can ask
But
this
let me
county
also point
how
out
I've had to go
that
sacrifice.
when the markets go down and Caltrans or
Yeah.
PERS needs more money,
Zero.
the county has to make it up. We're looking right now, and Linda can jump up and help me here, but it's either in next year's budget, 2010, 2011, or it's 2011, 2012, we're anticipating we're going to have to increase the general fund contribution to PERS by over $1 million a year to make up for the decline in the stock market. And that's all of our money. That's general fund money. So help me, Linda, if I got the year wrong. Is it either next year's budget or the following year budget that we're anticipating?
I think it's 11-12.
It's 11-12, because there's a lag at which PERS comes back and asks us to do a makeup. But that's a huge hit for Calaveras County.
And the
If we
point
had to
that
take
Tom-
another
yeah.
$1 million out of this budget, I mean, it would be pretty tough down there.
Well, following, and Tom's exactly right here. One of the problems with defined benefit plans is that in a recession, when the portfolio backing those plans also goes down with private investments, is when taxpayer obligations go up as exactly the wrong time, because taxpayer obligations are bound to have to increase at precisely the wrong stage in an economic cycle. And that's one of the things that really is counterintuitive about defined benefit plans generally. Any question on non-pension? Well, all right.
Guy in the blue.
You know, there's no doubt that we need to improve the economy and get people to work. So what is the one area of taxation policy that we could change to improve our economy and get people to work?
I would say reducing the income tax, both corporate and personal income tax, number one. But the tax element is 50% of it. The other half is the regulatory climate. The regulatory climate in California is a joke. We drive people out of this state, and I've testified before a legislative committee in Utah who they thanked me for the California legislature. They said, we love your California legislature because they do more for economic development in Utah than anybody else. And that is exactly true with our insane land use and environmental regulations. At this point, should we go ahead and transition to the panel? Or one, yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to just ask one question of you. Sure. That is, in the name of good government, they're proposing to put on the ballot to have a new constitutional
Convention? Yeah.
We're all very worried about that because it seems like, to me, the things they want is they want to do away with the two-thirds majority and for taxes in the state legislature. They want to do away with Prop 13 and the like. Are you guys taking a look? And I understand it's coming through the initiative process and the petition process, not through the state legislature, but it's obviously being driven, I think, considerably by the Democrats, and it's going to come out as a good government. Look, we're broken. See, can't you look around? It's
Right.
broken. So let's have a new convention, and we will fix it all for you. Are you following that? And
We're
what are your
following it
thoughts-
very closely. We've
what are
written,
your thoughts on
yeah, we've signed a letter with a lot of taxpayer groups and free market groups opposing the Constitutional Convention. The main push is from a group called the Bay Area Council. Some of them are kind of do-gooders, but they have no idea what they're getting into. Their theory is that they will select people from like a jury pool, but we are very concerned about the influence of the unions. Again, the one more opportunity for the unions to exercise their superior political strength in the process for the selecting of these people who are going to be rewriting our state constitution. Now, the good news is I was at a panel in Los Angeles, and it was not only myself and the Chamber of Commerce representative who spoke out against it, but also a couple of Democrats. Fabian Nunez looked at the guy from Bay Area Council and just said, this thing's stupid. And I was like, I couldn't believe that someone as liberal as Nunez, and also Steve Peace, another a moderate Democrat from San Diego, was very critical of the notion of a fix-it-all constitutional convention. So I think I'm cautiously optimistic that thing will not get off the ground, but we're watching it very carefully.
If you got time, I will push my luck and ask for two reply. One of them is there's going to be a panel assembled for the redistricting. Okay. How much faith can we have in that panel? Is that stacked or is it pretty straight? That's one question. The other question is, the state was mentioning that they're going to borrow money from the counties and service districts and so on. Now, if my memory serves me right, Prop 288 specified that the money cannot be used except for the purpose that the voters approved. Can they touch the service district which accumulates money for certain use? Can a state borrow money from the service districts?
Your first question on the redistricting, it's not perfect, but it's better than what we have now. It's not as
Can it be trusted?
To a point, again, better than what we have now. We supported it. We looked at the way that panel was put together. It's a little convoluted, but it's not bad. So I would say, yeah, probably for now, you can, trust but verify. And your question on the borrowing, under Prop 1A, an earlier version of 1A, the one that was supported by counties and cities, my understanding is that whatever money is rated is borrowed and will have to be paid back with interest under the constitutional protection for local governments that they secured, I think, 4 years ago. So, yeah, another IOU.
The district can loan money out to the state regardless if they don't want it. They don't want to.
Actually, it's being borrowed under the JPA, and the League of California Cities and CSAC are putting together the California Community to borrow against that money, and then it has to be paid back by June 30th.
Who says state?
And there's some litigation that will resolve this as well, but so I don't know how that's going to shake out. My automatic answer is the state can generally do what it wants because counties are political subdivisions of the state, and they are somewhat subject to them, except for Prop 1A, the constitutional protection. So I do think it has to be paid back, but I don't know the extent to which they can raid without with impunity. And with that, do you want to bring up the? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's give him a good hand. Wow, what a job. Well, it's not over. We're going to have, John's not going far because we're going to have a panel. And we're going to be discussing these issues again and some other ones. John, if you could sit over here, you'll have a microphone, or 3 panelists will be coming over here. The panel will be moderated by Corey Burnell, because you don't want to hear from me all the time. But before you finish with me, we're going to get some more money out of you. Now, we like to be honest about that. We're going to do an auction. We were first going to do a raffle, but we thought you were more intelligent